Hello, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Douglas Johnson. I am a certified yoga teacher at the advanced 500-hour level. I am a musician and kirtan artist and also an ordained minister. And today I wanted to talk about being human. Before I get into today's talk, though, I do want to thank the community that makes these talks possible. They are the community over on Patreon, on my Patreon page. So my patrons, they contribute monthly, and that allows me to take the time and resources to make these videos and put them on YouTube without any kind of paywall, which is really how I like to work when possible. So if you'd like to join that community, please check out the links below. And if you'd like to help out in other ways, you can like, subscribe, comment, and share. Those really do help a lot. All right, so being human. I find the word human being very interesting, the name for what we are, and I have no idea about the origins of it. Maybe one day I'll do some research and then maybe I'll do another talk about that, but it's interesting to me that being is in the word. And I think this is important because what I think is that it's only by knowing our beingness that we really allow the human to be fully human. My experience of the spiritual path of spiritual awakening, whatever you want to call it, has been one of becoming aware of a part of myself, if you will, that was hidden in plain view. It was right there, it's always there, but it's very easy to overlook. And that's the beingness part. That is, we could call it awareness, we could call it oneness, emptiness, Christ consciousness. I mean, there's all kinds of names, and different people will have different ideas about what these things mean. But for me, those things are pointing to this part, the Buddha nature, the beingness, that part of us that pervades and is eternal. It's just always there. The self with a large S, if you will, our true nature. So this is always present. It's always there. But the vast majority of people are not really aware of this, or that that is significant in any way. They are so identified with their thoughts and their story. Like Eckhart Tolle says, the story of me. They're so consumed and identified with that story. Even if you pointed it out to them that there is this beingness that's there, they really would probably not take any interest in it. But when we awaken, we become aware of this part of ourselves in one form or another, one way or another. We become aware that there's more to what's going on than just our story, our beliefs. And what's interesting to me is it seems like in certain traditions in the past, once people became aware of that, there was a sort of rejection of the human side of things, the changing, the forms, the things we can, or the things that we do name, right? The being part, the eternal part, is the nameless and the formless, and it truly is. There's really nothing we can say about it that is very meaningful. It's just there. It's always there. And in my experience, it is everything, actually. There is no separation between the forms that I see and what it is, but it seems like there's a difference. So there's this part of the self that is this unchanging, unmoving, always beingness that's always there. And then there is this seeming dance or play of thoughts, emotions, scenes, and different things that are happening. And again, if I go back to my understanding of different traditions, it seems that early on there was a sort of rejection of the forms of the human. And a lot of times these things were called unreal or dreamlike. And I can't say that I know exactly what these teachers were pointing to. Perhaps if I spoke with them in person, maybe there was a more nuanced way of interpreting what they were teaching. But I think the way often it has at least been interpreted, whether this is correct interpretation or not, is again a rejection of the human experience, of the forms. This sort of idea of, I'm going to retreat from this, which is not really real, and I'm going to emphasize and really try and live with this beingness, just sort of being. And I'll spend all my day in meditation just being, and I'm going to try and minimize my interaction with all of this stuff. And what I think is interesting is I feel like now, and this is just intuition, I can't point to any big scripture or any big name teacher. This is just how this awakeness has matured in me over time. My sense, my intuition is telling me that that is not the way, that really we're at a time where the integration, the ultimate recognition and sort of a non-dual perspective is that the forms and the formless are not really separate, they're not really different. There's just one thing. So this, again, the illusion of separate forms, separate people, individuals, God and me, this sort of dualistic perspective isn't really ultimately true. There really is just one thing. Like one of my teachers like to say, there's just one thing going on and you're it. So learning to love the human, that to me has been a very interesting part of this journey. And this is where I feel when I speak with others, many people maybe get stuck or get confused. So often people will come to me with, I'm feeling this emotion, what do I do about it? Or I'm acting in this way, and what do I do about it? And I get it on one hand, because there is this sort of recognition of the perfection of that beingness, and we can have these experiences and insights of just how beautiful and perfect everything actually is. And we might behave very differently when we're coming from that perspective. And it's very tempting to just believe that, well, this is the real perspective. This is the ultimate perspective. This is the only perspective. And when I'm experiencing a more human perspective, that is ego, and that is incorrect, and that is a problem. And I'm not sure that that's correct. What we truly are has this wonderful ability to identify as an individual, to identify with anything. It is just so limitless in that way. And my experience of it is it does not see identification with form as necessarily a problem. It can identify with form and, in a sense, enjoy it. That again, it's not two things. And these identifications that we see as so problematic, my experience of it from that beingness, that awareness, is it doesn't see it as a problem. In a weird way, it's like the ego is the only thing that sees the ego as a problem. Now, I'm not trying to say go out and be a huge ego, or that you don't need to work on your perspective or whatever it is. Everyone's in a different space, but this is coming from a very high level of understanding, and for someone who's experienced a lot of the more basic teachings and insights. And human being, for me, is very interesting, because human, usually when we talk about our humanness, we're very often talking about our imperfections, what we see as imperfect. And again, I think this is very telling, because we as human beings, we often conceptualize that there is some perfect way to be. Followers of Krishna might assume that Krishna was perfect. But if I read just personally about his behavior in his life, unless I take it for granted that he is already perfect, then I personally can see a lot in his behavior that I think is not very perfect. Same with Jesus. If we read the story with the idea that Jesus is perfect, then we just have to take everything he did and say, well, it was perfect. But the people that lived with him at the time didn't see it as perfect. In fact, they saw him as so problematic, they had him crucified. So what is this idea of perfect? What is the perfect person? Again, I get it that followers of certain traditions will point to Jesus, Krishna, Buddha, and say, oh, well, they were perfect. But is that really true? Are you, again, just seeing everything that they do through that lens? I was watching a talk by someone this morning, and they were a Zen teacher, and they were talking about how in the past, the students would always see the teacher as perfect. And so they would just explain away any idiosyncratic behavior or any faults as, well, this must just be part of the teaching. This must be them testing me, whatever it might be. And he was saying how he thinks this is incorrect. I agree with him wholeheartedly. And he said many of the teachers encouraged this kind of thinking. And this is something that I don't encourage, not for people who work with me or with any teacher. I think that that is a dangerous place to come from. I think we need to respect our teachers. I think that we need to listen to them. We often should give them the benefit of the doubt, but they're human. And I don't think that's a bad thing. That's sort of what I'm trying to get to with this talk. I think being human is a beautiful thing. But when we, again, talk about perfection, what does that even mean? Is there such a thing? If we talk about the perfect car, has anyone agreed on what the perfect car is? If we talk about the perfect body, can everyone agree on what the perfect body is? I understand there's consensus and we can get majorities, but is this really perfection? these ideas can morph and change over time. What the perfect body is, the perfect looks, perfect behavior, right? Do we really know? The perfect diet. This is a big one. People love to argue about diets. What's the perfect diet for a human being? So if we can let go of this idea that even such a thing exists and learn to love and accept the human for what it is, which is imperfect. And this is the experience that beingness signed up for in becoming human. Now, this is not meant to be used as an excuse to be a terrible person, not to try and grow or learn, but it is meant to temper something I see a lot in spiritual communities and people who, in modern life, just in general, this idea that we always need to be improving ourselves. We always need to be productive. We always need to be doing something. And I think this is a mistake. I think that the being, again, this is the essence of meditation, at least the way that I try and teach it. Spend a few minutes every day just being. We're called human beings, not human doings. But the way most modern people live their lives is human doing. The minute we wake up and we are conscious that we're awake, we're trying to do something. We're trying to improve our lives or improve the lives of others or fix something or make something. And my experience is that while it's great to do all those things, we should have time and space for just being. I think this is the part of the importance of things like observing the Sabbath, having time where we're not working, having time where we're just being. And related with this is play, right? Why do children play? What are they getting out of that? It's fun. They're just having fun. They're just enjoying themselves. There's no purpose. They're not going to produce anything of value outside of the joy that it brings them. And this is the interesting thing about being, is my experience of being is it is joyful. And the more time we can spend with that being, oftentimes the more we can connect with that joy. And herein lies a potential danger for us. And this is what can happen to meditators, is you then start to see that as another thing to do, right? Well, now I have to do my meditation. And in that attitude, we've created another doing. So this is very subtle. How do I do my meditation without doing anything? And I'll put that question to you. How do you? It's all up here. It's all in our mind. It's all in our approach. But again, when people come and say, well, I had a terrible meditation, or my meditation's not working, or whatever it might be, they are again coming with this mindset of being productive, of getting something, of doing something with their meditation. And the whole point of being is you don't have to do anything. to be. You just are. You are already. And for me, this is really the deepest insight that I have experienced so far, is just the effortlessness of what that really means. That there isn't really anything we need to do to be spiritual. There isn't anything we need to fix. And this relates very much with what I wanted to talk about today, which is this, again, this idea that we're constantly working on ourselves, that we fall short of some imaginary measure of what a human should be. And I get it. I personally have so many shortcomings and faults, if you will, as a human being. So many things that I would love to change about this person. And maybe I will have the opportunity to change those things. But the interesting thing is, can I also just love him as he is? Can I bring awareness to him and accept him as he is, without the idea that I have to change this, that this needs to change? And so being and human, for me, again, these two words point to a sort of a yin-yang relationship. And what I really feel is at the heart of what I'm trying to share with you. Your average person has not really become conscious or aware, or does not value the being side of themselves. This is what we might call pre-awakening. They think God is out there, or spirituality needs to be earned, or it's an experience that they need to have. It's right there for everybody all the time. Again, an experience can reveal it to us, make it more evident, make us more aware of it, but it's not creating it, it's already there. So to wake up to our true nature is just that, to become aware of it, what's already there. And then there's the human side of us. Once we wake up, again, very often I find that there is this sort of knee-jerk reaction to rejecting the human experience, to getting on this spiritual conveyor belt, if you will, where it's okay, well, now I need to fix everything, and I need to become more spiritual, and I need to cleanse myself, and I need to get rid of all these nasty habits. And there may be some nasty habits you need to get rid of. I've spoken before about waking up and then cleaning up, and I do think that is a very important thing. However, more important than that, I think, is the acceptance, the beingness. And the beingness part of us does not need to fix or change anything. And my experience of it is it loves. It loves even the imperfect human. And again, there's no such thing as a perfect human. If you were to perfect yourself however you think that you should be, you'd find there are people who still don't like you, people who still think you're doing it wrong. So who's to say? Maybe we say, well, I get to decide how I want to be. Okay. But my experience of being human is I'm actually quite powerless in this. There are things that I have found that I can change, and there also seem to be things that I cannot change, at least for the time being. And so I have to learn to accept those things. And again, I don't think that that's a bad thing. I do not. So being and human, bringing these two together in love, in acceptance. And the being holds the human, the whole human experience, the world, the other people that you experience. All of this is part of that human experience. And learning to hold it all and to love it all, it's not something that being has to learn to do. It's something that we rather have to allow it. We have to learn to relax into it. And this is where today's talk comes in. When we're thinking we need to fix the human, and we need to improve the human, and we need to make the human more spiritual, and we need to have the human constantly connected and high vibe and whatever it is that we're thinking, we're rejecting. In that very moment, we're rejecting the human experience as it is being presented to us in that moment. And as strange as it sounds, moment by moment, this is to me where spirituality really happens, because there is no other moment than this one. So when else am I going to learn to love and accept what is, other than right now? Why do I need to think about loving what is theoretically when there are things in this moment that I don't approve of and I don't like, that I can learn to love? See, so often with spirituality, people think in the abstract and they think in terms of time. But for me, this is never what spiritual teaching is really about. It's always about this moment. And it's always about what's going on inside of us. So loving what is, as Byron Katie likes to say, is learning to love this moment and what is appearing, the arisings that are part of this moment. And again, in my experience, it's not beingness that rejects it. It's a part of the human. And this is where the human learning to get out of the way and learning to relax and let go, and to let go and let God, if you will. Beingness is the divine. It is God. It is holy. And again, it doesn't need help, or it doesn't need to be purified. It doesn't need anything. It's really these vestiges in our mind where we find ourselves holding on. And so even though I recognize the irony in that today, I'm, in a sense, giving you another instruction. You might feel like, well, he's telling me another thing that I need to do. But the truth is, in my experience, it's not. It really is something to stop doing. And stopping is different than doing. And if you don't know the difference, it really is quite different. There is a very different quality to, oh, now I need to go do something more doing, versus just stop. And that's really what I'm trying to say. Gangaji's teacher, Papaji, supposedly that's what he taught her. He said, just stop. Stop. Stop all of it. And in that, she had a great awakening. She'd already had experiences. She was already on the spiritual path. This was not her first rodeo. But he was the one that really got her to understand that those last vestiges of seeking, of trying to be spiritual, trying to be perfect, whatever it was that she was after, he basically showed her that's not the way. At a certain point in the path, it might be. For those who are just starting out, they may need to strive and work very hard. So I do want to be mindful that if that is you, and there are certain people like that in my community, then this talk may not be for you. You may need to continue doing and working. But when the time is right, there is a time for acceptance and for stopping and letting go and being and allowing. And that allows grace to come in, where we're not earning anything. We don't need to earn anything. We're not doing anything. We don't need to do anything. And we're just, again, really being and allowing that being. And the being is allowing the human, the imperfectness of the human, you could say wretchedness if you want. I don't know. It seems like as human beings, we're so good at rejecting ourselves. And I think this is one of the reasons why so many people look for a teacher that is not very human. A teacher who seems otherworldly, who perhaps eats a very different diet than they eat, who perhaps doesn't take part in activities that the individual sees as so enjoyable, like sex or alcohol or other things. We seek out someone who seems so far from that, and we think, well, they must have the answers. And indeed, they might have answers for you. But in my experience, just because somebody is odd, or just because someone is not necessarily doing the things that all the other humans are doing, does not necessarily mean that they actually know about beingness, spirit, and the integration of this with their humanity. So, I hope today's talk was helpful. I know it may have seemed perhaps a bit unfocused, but this is a subtle point. And I think it's an important point, however, for the right person at the right time to let go of that striving and perfecting, and really to rest in one's true nature and to see the human very clearly, not to, because so often when we reject the human, we're justifying what the human's doing. We're trying to, well, you know, it's because of this, because of that. I don't even know why what is for the human is. I honestly don't. It's very, very mysterious. But it's also very interesting. It's fascinating. And when I really feel most connected with that part of myself that I'm referring to as beingness, it's also fascinated. It's amused. It is in wonderment at itself, because it's only experiencing itself. So all the things it can be, and it can also be imperfect. It can be limited. It's so unlimited, it can be unlimited, and it can experience itself as limited. It's so perfect, it can experience itself as imperfect. That's how perfect it is. So it's a very beautiful thing in my experience. And I can't say that I always can plug into that perspective, but it's definitely one that I have had. And this is also another beautiful thing about our true nature, is it can shift and change perspectives. I think a mistake we can make is to think that there is one ultimate true perspective. My current thinking on this is that may not actually be true. Even the perspective of God knowing all, seeing all, being all is just another perspective. It's not necessarily a more legitimate or true perspective than the one that I have now. And this is what I mean about loving what is and respecting what is, respecting your humanity rather than trying to write it off, respecting your emotions instead of trying to push them away and think that it's more spiritual to not feel anything. Of course, we don't want to be erratic, crazy. We don't want to be egocentric. But this idea that somehow we're going to completely wipe the human away, I think is a mistake and a trap. And I think it's one that many fall into. So again, I hope this was helpful and insightful. That's why I share these videos. Again, I want to thank the community, because it really is, this is a community effort. And if you are a part of that community, I cannot tell you how grateful I am. Until next time, namaste, and have a beautiful, beautiful day.